Hello folks, welcome to my YouTube channel Watercolor Impressions. We always do animals and sunny paintings. Let's do something different this week and paint a foggy scene with reflections. This reference was taken when I went for a morning stroll in the early morning and there was a lot of fog in Toronto. And there is something about streetcar excites me when it's in the rain and the foggy environment. Before we get on to it, hit that subscribe button so you guys can get weekly updates from our channel. And let's get started, guys. So before we start, I'm gonna put the street light first because I want the pigment consists to be really dark. So I'm going with it. This is pure pigment with no water in it. You could see when I put it, the pigment stays pretty good. And you can also see I also added some dark spots here and there, drawing underneath it so I know where the darkest light goes. So once I added that, now let's add the street sign as well. Might as well add this. So whenever I paint, I try to be really loose. I hate the tight look. So once I did that, now let's focus on the background. So now we add the foreground elements. I'm going to take a big brush and I want to create a gradient from top to bottom. So in reality, if you see the foggy scene, it usually looks white. So what I'm going to do is I'm adding a little bit of Winsor violet in my brush, and it kind of gives this this foggy look in it. I'm just going to take a little bit of water and I want to create a bead which collects at the bottom. I'm just being careful not to go over my signal light. And I want a lot of water in it because we're going to create a gradient in a second. You will see what I mean by that. So I went over my lights and my signboard, and if you do it, so be it. Don't fuss about it. It's okay, guys. We all make mistakes. So now I'm just leaving some gaps for the people, the scene on the front, and I'm going to keep building this thing till the building in here. Yep. So now you can see there's a lot of water collecting at the bottom. So now we can use gravity as our friend and create the gradient. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just float my canvas. You can see the waters are coming from the bottom. So what I'm going to do, I want to create this gradient. So I'm taking French Ultramarine blue and mixing a little bit of NeutralTint in it. And let's add a little bit of yellow ochre in as well. So what I'm going to do is keep run the pigment like that. So I'm not trying to not to go over this building. I'm just there you go. So there you go. So I'm just creating the pigment and I want that to run through from bottom to the top. You can also build a little bit. So now I'm putting some magenta in it. You can see it will bleed and it will blend beautifully in our pigment. And just throw colors here and there because I want to create the gradient here. And once it dries out, it's going to give a beautiful gradient for our paint. I'm just leaving some highlights for the building, and I'm just creating this pigment, and I'm just taking it over here. So now I'm gonna flip it to see how that gradient has been created. So you can see here. So now I'm just going to add some buildings. Let's leave that this white spots here and there. There's like a big building there, and there's a small building here. let's add one more building here as well. Now I showed you guys how I usually work, the face I work when I paint. So now I'm going to speed up the video so that you guys don't get bored watching this long video. So let's start with the foreground building. So I'm using burnt amber and raw amber, mixing it so that I get a little bit of warmer building tone. So I'm doing it dark in the foreground. As it goes out, I want to make them faded. So it gives the illusion of depth in our painting. So I'm going to keep building up the pigment, as you can see. And I also left some eyelets for the signs for the foreground. So I'm being careful at top of my streetcar so that I don't go over my streetcar. So now let's focus on the road. So I want to create underpainting to create a glow on our road. So I'm using yellow ochre to create that warmth. So in streets of Toronto, there is a darker road, that is tar road, and for the railway tracks, they also have this warmer mud color in it. So I just want to create that warmth on the painting. But as it comes to the foreground, I want to increase my pigment consistency so it creates a lead-in. Now let's focus on the tram or streetcar. Especially in Canada, they call it streetcar. In some other countries, they call it tram. So the streetcars in Toronto, they have this red and white and black color schemes. So for the red, I'm using cadmium red. So I'm going darker wherever the red stops, and I'm using water to create the gradient. But in the front part, since it's facing and it's also foggy scene, it doesn't absorb that much lighting. So I'm adding a little bit of neutral tint in my red to get a darker tone. And you can also see I also added the floor. It's going to be in the darker shape. For the whites, I don't want to keep it really white because I want the sky to be reflecting on my white. So I'm using a little bit of cobalt blue in it to create that coolness in it. So there's a red color scheme at the bottom too. And I'm also adding a little bit of neutral tint in the front as well. For the glass, which is facing the front face of it, so this is a pure pigment with the less water of neutral tint in it. So as it dries out, it gets lighter. I'll just go ahead and fill with Payne's gray. So Payne's gray, I have this coolest gray. So I just want to fill the glass with it. So it kind of have reflection on it. So later we'll go and fill with a darker value on top of it. That's a famous saying of Bob Ross. So let's add some happy little trees where it anchors where it kind of frames our streetcar as well as the building at the background. So for the trees, I'm using cadmium yellow, cerulean blue, and a little bit of neutral tint in it so that it doesn't look vibrant and it looks a little bit of gray. So before it dries out, I'm adding neutral tint on it so that it bleeds and it gives a mid-tone and darker tones in my trees, and it gives a beautiful illusion of forms in our trees as well. So I'm going a little bit darker wherever the streetcar sits because it gives a little bit of a nice framing for our streetcar as well. So at the top, I'm just trying to break up the edges so that it kind of looks like there's tree leaves popping out. And I'm also taking water to fade out some of the trees at the top since it's a foggy scene in our painting. I don't want the tree to read that well in our painting. As you can see in the streetcar, the red kind of faded now, so I'm glazing over with cadmium red again. And I also want to have the darker details now. So for the darker details, I'm using neutral tint, and you can see I'm adding some impressionistic reflections on the front part of our streetcar. So the streetcar contains 4 segments, so I'm being aware of my perspective. The first one looks a little bit bigger, and the second one gets skinnier as it goes out and as it fades out. For the bottom, I add a little bit of neutral tint as well. So since I have a darker pigment in my brush, I thought I'll just mix a little bit of burnt amber and just add where the road and the platform meets. So I'm keep building up the pigment until I'm happy. So I'm also adding the floor, and I'm also going at the side of the streetcar now. I'm using neutral tint for it. Let's bring back some eyelets in our painting. So for the front part of the store, I'm using some lettering. And for the people who are standing underneath the store, I'm also adding eyelets for it. So the shed which is in front of the store, I'm kind of adding as well. And there's also light in front part of the streetcar. I added that. On the top, there's also some kind of machines and pods which are attached to the streetcar. I also added that as well. And for the trees at the background, it looks like a big flat shape, so I want to have some lighter values in it as well. So I'm putting white paint and putting some water in it to blend it through. Let's jump on to the fun part of our painting. So let's add some directional lines, wires, and whichever helps us to take us to lead in the painting and a perspective. So this process is fairly easy, and I don't match exactly to the reference. I see a pattern in my reference, I match to it. So this process is I use a rigger brush. If you want to see what brush I'm using, and you can check out my brushes video in my YouTube channel. So I'm creating lines which is going from the foreground to the background, and there's also wires connected from left to right and right to left. And being said that, I'm also want to make it sophisticated as well. Let's add some reflection for our ground. So it's a fairly easy process. So I'm gonna wet my road with clean water, as you can see, and I'm just putting colors whichever is in my streetcar. For example, you can see I added cadmium red and neutral tint wherever it meets. And for people in the foreground, I'm also using neutral tint. And I'll do this process till I'm happy with it and with pigment consistency. But in the foreground, I want a thicker pigment consistency. And whereas for the midground and on the background, I want to read it really minimal. And I was using a lot of blending techniques here. If you want to learn how to blend watercolors and create a gradient, you can check out my Absolute Beginner series for blending, how to blend in watercolors. And once I'm happy with the reflection, I'm using a brush and I'm using take away the paint from my road, because that gives the directional lines in our painting for the tracks where the streetcar rides. I'm using white paint now, so using white paint to create the reflection of the streetcar which is reflecting on the ground. And that's it, folks. Thanks again for watching this tutorial on painting with me. Let me know what you learned from this video and what's your favorite color in this painting. If you have any other requests or subjects you want me to cover in watercolors, let me know in the comments or write me at watercolorimpressions@gmail.com. Thanks again for watching this tutorial. Please hit that subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And please do share with your friends and family. And good luck with your painting, folks.